The phone in Layla's pocket was recording when the eldest son said, "Just sign the papers, Dad, unless you want to end up in a state facility where they don't even remember to feed you." Layla Hassan, a 28-year-old hospice nurse from Lebanon, kept her eyes on her clipboard, her hand steady as she checked Miguel Reyes's vitals, but her heart was racing, her mind screaming at the cruelty wrapped in concern, the threat disguised as advice. Miguel, 79 years old and weakening from stage 4 pancreatic cancer, sat in his wheelchair by the window of his Coral Gables mansion, his weathered hand trembling as he held the unsigned power of attorney document. Beside him, his wife Teresa, 77 and battling advanced Alzheimer's, hummed softly to herself, oblivious to the tension filling the room like smoke. "Daniel," Miguel said quietly, his Spanish accent still thick despite 50 years in Miami, "I am not ready to give up control of everything I built." "You're dying," Daniel replied flatly, his expensive suit and Tag Heuer watch announcing his success. "And Mom doesn't even know what year it is. Someone has to make decisions, and it's not going to be some random nurse." He glanced at Layla with that look, the one that said she was furniture, invisible, beneath notice. He had no idea the phone in her scrubs pocket was capturing every word. "I am your father," Miguel said, and the pain in his voice had nothing to do with cancer. "Not a problem to be managed." "You're both," Daniel said, "and I'm trying to help you while you can still be helped." Layla had been working for the Reyes family for 3 weeks, hired through an agency that specialized in end-of-life care. She'd seen many families navigate the terrible waters of terminal illness. She'd witnessed grief, exhaustion, fear, and love in countless combinations. But this felt different, wrong. Over the past 3 weeks, she'd watched the 3 Reyes children visit with increasing frequency, always with documents, always with urgency, always leaving their parents more distressed than before. She'd heard conversations about assets and accounts and properties, but rarely about comfort or memories or love. And yesterday, she'd overheard something that made her decision for her. It had been Daniel's sister, Patricia, speaking on the phone in the hallway, thinking Layla was downstairs with Teresa. "Once we have power of attorney, we can liquidate everything before the medical bills eat it all," Patricia had said. "Hospice care costs a fortune, and they could linger for months. We need to move fast before Dad realizes what we're doing." That was when Layla had downloaded the recording app on her phone, not to use against them, not yet, but to document what was happening, to have proof if things got worse. Now, standing in the room watching Daniel pressure his dying father, Layla knew things were already worse than she'd imagined. "I need time to think," Miguel said finally. "You don't have time," Daniel snapped. "Sign it now, or I'll have you declared incompetent. I've already talked to a lawyer about it." The threat hung in the air like poison. Miguel's eyes filled with tears, not from physical pain, though Layla knew he had plenty of that, but from the betrayal of a son he'd sacrificed everything to raise. "Perhaps," Layla said carefully, her voice soft but firm, "Mr. Reyes needs rest now. His pain levels are elevated and stress makes it worse." Daniel turned to her, his expression cold. "Nobody asked for your opinion." "I'm his nurse," Layla replied, meeting his gaze. "His well-being is my job." "Your job is to give him pills and change sheets," Daniel said, "not to interfere in family matters." "His health is a family matter," Layla countered, "and this conversation is making him worse." For a moment, she thought Daniel might fire her on the spot. But he seemed to calculate the optics of that, the difficulty of finding another qualified hospice nurse on short notice, the questions it might raise. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "But Dad, we're finishing this conversation tomorrow. No more delays." He left without saying goodbye, without touching his father's shoulder, without even a glance at his mother, who was still humming her wordless tune by the piano. After he was gone, Layla helped Miguel into bed for his afternoon rest. His hands were shaking, and not from the cancer. "I built a construction empire from nothing," he whispered. "I came to this country with $500 and a dream. I gave them everything, the best schools, the best opportunities, everything. And now they circle like vultures, waiting for me to die so they can cash out." "Not all children know how to face losing their parents," Layla said gently. "Sometimes fear makes people act in ways they'll regret." "This isn't fear," Miguel said. "This is greed. I've seen it growing for years. The expensive cars, the bigger houses, the keeping up with friends who inherited wealth instead of earning it. My children learned to want, but forgot how to work." He closed his eyes, exhausted from the confrontation. Teresa used to keep them grounded. Before the Alzheimer's, she was the moral compass of this family. Now she's lost in her own mind, and they treat her like she's already gone. Layla had noticed that too. The way the children talked around Teresa, not to her. The way they moved her from room to room like furniture. The absence of any attempt to connect with the woman she still was, even within the disease. "Your wife is still here," Layla said. "I see her respond to music, to gentle touch, to being treated with dignity. The Alzheimer's has taken much, but not everything." "You see her," Miguel said. "My children just see a problem." Over the following days, Layla kept recording. Not constantly, she wasn't trying to spy on private moments, but whenever the children visited, whenever documents came out, whenever the pressure and manipulation began. She recorded Patricia telling Miguel that his longtime lawyer was too old and incompetent, and insisting he switch to her friend who'd handle things better. She recorded the youngest son, Carlos, suggesting they sell the family home immediately because it's just going to waste with you dying and Mom not knowing where she is anyway. She recorded Daniel's wife commenting that at least once this is over, we can finally take that European vacation without feeling guilty. But she also recorded other things, moments the children never saw because they didn't stay long enough or pay close enough attention. She recorded Miguel playing Teresa's favorite bolero on the stereo, and the way Teresa's face lit up with recognition, her hand reaching for his, their fingers intertwining with the muscle memory of 53 years of marriage. She recorded Teresa, in one of her rare clear moments, looking at Miguel and saying, "Mi amor, you're tired. Rest now. I'll keep watch." The same thing she'd said to him for decades when he worked too hard, loved too much weight. She recorded Miguel, thinking he was alone, weeping quietly in his room, whispering, "Teresa, mi corazón, I'm sorry I'm leaving you with them. I'm so sorry." And she recorded the daily indignities, the children who called only to ask about documents, who visited only to pressure, who treated their parents like inconvenient obstacles rather than the people who'd given them life. 3 weeks into her recordings, Layla made a decision. She copied all the audio files to a secure cloud drive, then created a compilation, the worst moments, the clearest examples of manipulation and emotional abuse, edited together with timestamps and context notes. Then she did something that could cost her her job, her professional reputation, maybe even her career. She called a family meeting. Getting everyone to come wasn't hard. She simply told them it was about Miguel's deteriorating condition and the need to make decisions about his care plan. They arrived within hours, smelling opportunity. They gathered in the living room, Daniel, Patricia, Carlos, and their spouses. Miguel was in his wheelchair, alert but weak. Teresa sat in her favorite chair, a photo album in her lap that she turned through without seeing. Layla stood near the fireplace, her tablet in hand, her heart pounding, but her resolve solid. "Thank you," she said. "I asked you here because there are things that need to be said about your parents' care." "We already know the care plan," Daniel interrupted. "That's not why we're here." "Please," Layla said firmly, Let me speak." Something in her tone made them pause. Perhaps they sensed this wasn't going to be a routine medical update. "I've been your parents' nurse for 6 weeks now," Layla began. "In that time, I've watched how you interact with them. I've heard conversations you thought were private, and I've documented patterns of behavior that concern me deeply." "Documented?" Patricia's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means I recorded you," Layla said plainly. "Your conversations with your father about power of attorney, about selling assets, about your plans for after he dies. Your comments about your mother being a burden. Your threats to have your father declared incompetent if he doesn't comply with your demands." The room exploded. "That's illegal," Daniel shouted, standing up. "You can't record people without consent." "In Florida," Layla said calmly, "only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. I was present for all these conversations, which makes them legal to record." "You're fired," Daniel said flatly. "Pack your things and get out." "You can't fire me," Layla replied. "I work for your father, not you, and I suspect he'll want to hear what I've recorded before making any decisions about my employment." Miguel, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. "Play it." "Dad, don't listen to this woman," Patricia pleaded. "She's clearly trying to manipulate you, to come between you and your family." "Play it," Miguel repeated, his voice stronger now. "I want to hear what my children say about me when they think I'm not really listening." Layla connected her tablet to the room's sound system, the expensive setup Daniel had installed for his father to enjoy music, but which Miguel barely used anymore because music reminded him of dancing with Teresa, and she could no longer dance. The first recording played. Daniel's voice, clear and cold. "Just sign the papers, Dad, unless you want to end up in a state facility where they don't even remember to feed you." Miguel's face remained impassive, but his hands gripped the wheelchair arms. The second recording. Patricia on the phone. "Once we have power of attorney, we can liquidate everything before the medical bills eat it all." Teresa looked up from her photo album, some distant awareness that these voices belonged to her children, though she couldn't quite grasp the context. The recordings continued. "Carlos, it's just going to waste with you dying and Mom not knowing where she is anyway." Daniel's wife. "At least once this is over, we can finally take that European vacation without feeling guilty." 15 minutes of recordings, 15 minutes of their own words, played back in their presence, undeniable and damning. When the last recording ended, the silence in the room was absolute. Teresa had stopped turning pages in her photo album. Miguel sat motionless in his wheelchair, tears running down his weathered face. The children looked anywhere but at their parents, shame and anger warring on their faces. "How could you?" Miguel said finally, his voice breaking. "How could you?" "Dad, it sounds worse than it is," Daniel tried. "We're just trying to be practical." "Practical," Miguel repeated. "Is that what we call it when you threaten your dying father? When you plan to take everything before I'm even gone? When you talk about your mother like she's already dead?" "You don't understand the pressure we're under," Patricia said, tears in her eyes now. "Watching you die, dealing with Mom's Alzheimer's, trying to manage our own lives." "I am dying," Miguel said, his voice rising with anger that gave him temporary strength. "I am dying. And instead of spending these last months with me, you spend them trying to take what I built. Instead of talking to your mother, you talk around her like she's furniture." "That's not fair," Carlos protested. "Mom doesn't even know who we are half the time." "She knows love from indifference," Layla interjected quietly. "She responds to gentle touch, to familiar music, to being treated like a person instead of a problem. I've seen it every day. You would too if you spent time with her instead of just managing her." "You have no right," Daniel started, turning on Layla. You're just the hired help. She has every right, Miguel interrupted. She cares for your mother with more tenderness in one day than you've shown in months. She advocated for me when you were bullying me. She saw what I was too heartbroken to admit, that my children value my money more than my life. The words hit like physical blows. Patricia began crying openly. Carlos looked stricken. Daniel's face had gone red with shame and anger. I think you should leave, Miguel said quietly. All of you. I need to think about what comes next. Dad, please. Patricia reached for him. Leave, Miguel repeated. Layla will call you when I'm ready to talk again. They left, one by one, some crying, some silent, all shamed. The mansion felt larger and emptier after their departure, but also somehow lighter, as if a toxic presence had been removed. Miguel sat in his wheelchair, exhausted from the confrontation. Teresa had returned to her photo album, humming softly. Layla began gathering the scattered tissues and water glasses, giving them space. Thank you, Miguel said quietly. I may have overstepped, Layla admitted. I could lose my nursing license for recording patients' family members. They weren't patients, Miguel pointed out. They were vultures. And you documented their behavior because you cared about two elderly people who were being exploited. That's not overstepping, that's heroism. I don't know about heroism, Layla said. I just couldn't watch it anymore. Miguel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What else did you record? You mentioned there were other things. So Layla played him the other recordings, the ones of him and Teresa holding hands while music played. Teresa's moment of clarity when she'd told him to rest. His private tears when he thought he was alone. I recorded these, Layla explained, because I wanted you to know that even in the darkness of illness and decline, there are still moments of beauty. Your children see only what they're losing: inheritance, convenience, the parents they remember. But they miss what's still here: love, connection, the people you still are. Miguel wept as he listened to himself and Teresa in their private moments, the recordings capturing a tenderness his children no longer witnessed. Play the music one again, he said, the one where Teresa remembered. Layla played it. Teresa's voice surprisingly clear. Mi amor, you're tired. Rest now. I'll keep watch. She's still my Teresa, Miguel whispered, lost in the fog, but still here, still loving me the only way she can. Wait, before their fate changes forever. If this story of love and danger has already captivated you, comment which character intrigues you the most. To make sure you don't miss any unexpected twists, subscribe and join our storytelling community. The most intense chapter is about to begin. Now, back to the plot. The days that followed were difficult. The children called repeatedly, by turns apologetic and defensive, begging for another chance or insisting they'd been misunderstood. Miguel refused to take most of the calls, asking Layla to screen them and tell them he'd reach out when ready. He wasn't ready. The betrayal had cut too deep. But he was also dying. His time measured in weeks now rather than months, and he had decisions to make about what would happen to Teresa after he was gone. I need to see my lawyer, he told Layla one morning. Not Patricia's friend, my real lawyer, Roberto, who's handled my affairs for 30 years. Roberto Castellanos arrived that afternoon, a dignified man in his 70s with kind eyes and a legal mind sharp as a blade. He'd known the Reyes family since Daniel was in elementary school. Mi amigo, Roberto said, embracing him carefully. I'm sorry it's come to this. You know? Miguel asked. I've suspected for months, Roberto admitted. The children have been asking questions about your assets, about trust structures, about what happens to Teresa's care if you predecease her. The questions felt less like concern and more like inventory. I need to change my will, Miguel said, and I need to ensure Teresa is protected. They worked for hours, with Layla present as a witness. Miguel's new will left his children enough to be comfortable, but not wealthy. Significant sums that honored their relationship but didn't reward their betrayal. The bulk of his estate, worth approximately $43 million, was placed in an irrevocable trust. The trust had a single purpose: ensuring Teresa received the highest quality care for the rest of her life, in the home she'd lived in for 40 years, surrounded by everything familiar. After Teresa's death, the remaining assets would fund a foundation for Alzheimer's research and support for caregivers. They get nothing more? Roberto asked, making sure Miguel understood. They get what they need, not what they want, Miguel said. And they get a lesson I should have taught them years ago, that love and loyalty matter more than money. They'll contest it, Roberto warned. Let them try, Miguel said. I have recordings of them plotting to liquidate my assets before I'm dead, threatening to have me declared incompetent and treating their dying father like an obstacle. No judge will overturn this will in favor of children who displayed such greed. Roberto nodded approval. And for Teresa's daily care? Layla, Miguel said immediately. If she's willing, I want her to be Teresa's primary caregiver, paid generously from the trust, with full authority to hire additional help as needed. Layla, who'd been quietly taking notes, looked up in shock. Mr. Reyes, I'm honored, but I'm a hospice nurse. My job is to care for you during your final time. After you pass, I'd normally move to another patient. I'm not asking you to abandon your calling, Miguel said. I'm asking you to extend it. You're the only person who sees Teresa as she is, not as she was, or as a burden. You treat her with dignity and gentleness. You understand that caring for someone isn't just medical, it's about preserving their humanity. Your children, Layla began, will have to accept it, Miguel finished, or contest the will and lose everything. The trust is structured so that if any beneficiary challenges it, they forfeit their inheritance entirely. Roberto is a genius that way. Roberto smiled slightly. I've learned a few things in 40 years of practice. Layla considered it. She'd planned to work in hospice for years, moving from patient to patient, providing comfort in final days. But something about Miguel and Teresa had gotten to her. Their love story, their tragedy, the way they'd been abandoned by the very people who should have cherished them most. I'll do it, she said, on one condition. Name it, Miguel said. That you let me bring in a counselor to work with your children. Not for your sake, they've lost that right, but for Teresa's. When you're gone, she'll need family around her, even if she doesn't always recognize them. Your children are terrible at this right now, but maybe they can learn to be better. Miguel considered this, his anger warring with his hope. Finally, he nodded. Try, but I won't force reconciliation. If they can't learn to love their mother without expecting payment, then they don't deserve access to her. The will was signed, witnessed, and filed. Miguel felt lighter afterward, as if releasing his children from their expected inheritance had also released him from the weight of their disappointment. His health declined rapidly after that. The cancer was winning, his body shutting down system by system. But his mind remained clear, and he used his remaining time deliberately. He recorded video messages for Teresa, to be played to her after his death. Reminders of his love, stories from their life together, reassurances that she was cared for. He didn't know if she'd understand them, but he made them anyway, because love didn't require comprehension. He wrote letters to his children, not angry screeds, but honest reflections on where he'd failed as a father and where they'd failed as children. He didn't mail them yet. He wanted to see if they'd come to those realizations on their own first. And he spent time with Teresa, holding her hand, playing her music, talking to her even when she didn't respond. Layla documented these moments too, not secretly now, but openly, creating a record of love that persisted even as memory failed. "Why do you record everything?" Miguel asked her one day. "Because memory is precious," Layla said. "And in families like yours, people forget what matters. Someday, your children might want to remember you, really remember you, not the inheritance you represented. These recordings will show them who you actually were." 2 weeks after the will was changed, Miguel called his children for a meeting. They came warily, uncertain whether to expect forgiveness or further banishment. Miguel was in his hospital bed now, moved into the living room so he could see the garden and the light. His breathing was labored, his skin gray, his time clearly short. "I wanted you to know," he said without preamble, "that I've changed my will." The children exchanged glances. Fear, calculation, hope. "You'll each receive $500,000, Miguel continued. "Enough to be comfortable, to pay off debts, to have security. But not enough to stop working, to stop striving, to coast on my death." "Dad," Daniel started. "The rest," Miguel said, "goes into a trust for your mother's care. After she's gone, it funds Alzheimer's research and caregiver support. You get no more inheritance because you've already shown what you do with it. Count it before I'm cold. Liquidate it before your mother knows I'm gone. Treat it as more important than the people who earned it." Patricia was crying. Carlos looked stricken. Daniel's face was unreadable. "I'm dying," Miguel said, his voice weakening. "And I could die angry, bitter, focused on your betrayal. But I don't want that. What I want is for you to understand something while there's still time." He paused, gathering strength. "You had parents who loved you more than money, who worked themselves to exhaustion to give you opportunities, who stayed together through hard times because commitment mattered. And you reduced all of that to a balance sheet." "We're sorry," Patricia began. "I don't want apologies," Miguel interrupted. "I want change. Your mother is going to outlive me. She's going to need family. Not for money, not for obligations, but because she's a human being who deserves to be loved. Layla will be her primary caregiver because Layla sees her as a person. But you're her children. You should see her that way too." "We do," Carlos said quietly. "Then prove it," Miguel challenged. "Spend time with her, not managing her, not discussing her, with her. Play her music, look at old photos together, hold her hand. She may not remember your names, but she remembers love. Be worth remembering." He looked at each of them in turn. "I've arranged for a family counselor to work with you if you're willing. Not to get back into the will, that's final, but to help you become the children your mother deserves in her final years." "We'll do it," Daniel said, and for the first time, he sounded sincere rather than strategic. "Dad, we'll do better." "Don't tell me," Miguel said. "Show your mother. And show Layla, who will be watching and reporting back to the trust administrators. If you can't treat Teresa with genuine love and respect, you'll be barred from visiting her. I won't have her final years contaminated by people who see her as a burden." It was harsh, but fair. The children nodded, chastened. "Can we stay?" Patricia asked. "Spend time with you both while there's still time?" Miguel considered, then nodded. "Yes, but leave the lawyers and the documents and the questions about assets outside. Come as children, or don't come at all." Over the following week, something shifted. The children came daily, and slowly, awkwardly at first, they began to engage with their parents as people rather than problems. Daniel sat with Teresa and went through old photo albums, narrating their family history. She didn't always understand, but she smiled at the photos, occasionally pointing at one and saying, "pretty" or "happy." Patricia brought their mother's favorite foods, Cuban pastries, café con leche, the sweets Teresa had made for them as children. Teresa didn't remember making them, but she enjoyed tasting them, and Patricia learned to find joy in that simple pleasure. Carlos brought his guitar and played songs their parents had danced to, watching Miguel's eyes light up with memory even as his body failed. Sometimes Teresa would hum along, the music reaching parts of her that words could no longer access. They weren't perfect. Old habits persisted. The impatience when Teresa asked the same question repeatedly, the frustration when she didn't recognize them, the discomfort with their father's increasing debilitation. But Layla and the counselor, Dr. Nia Williams, worked with them patiently, teaching them that caregiving wasn't about fixing or managing, but about presence and dignity. "Your mother doesn't need you to make her remember," Dr. Williams explained. "She needs you to meet her where she is now and love that person." "But she's not the same person," Daniel argued. "She's exactly the same person," Dr. Williams countered, "just experiencing reality differently. The love is still there. The lifetime of devotion is still there. You're the ones who changed, who started seeing her through the lens of loss instead of love." It was a difficult truth, but watching Layla interact with Teresa, the gentle touch, the patient repetition, the genuine affection, showed them what was possible. Miguel watched his children learning to be better, and some of his anger softened. They'd never be what he'd hoped, but perhaps they could become what Teresa needed. 3 weeks after the will was changed, Miguel slipped into unconsciousness. His children gathered around his bed, holding his hands, telling him they loved him, promising to care for Teresa. Layla stood nearby, monitoring his vitals, managing his pain, ensuring his dignity in these final hours. Teresa was brought to his bedside in her wheelchair. She looked at Miguel's still face, and something in her expression sharpened, awareness breaking through the fog. "Miguel," she whispered, "mi amor." Her hand found his, their fingers intertwining one last time. "You're tired," she said, the words clear and heartbreaking. "Rest now. I'll keep watch." The same words from the recording, but this time everyone heard them. The children wept at their mother's clarity, at the love that persisted beyond memory and reason. Miguel died 20 minutes later, Teresa's hand in his children surrounding him, Layla ensuring he felt no pain. The funeral was beautiful. The children, to their credit, organized it according to Miguel's wishes, a celebration of his life, not a performance of grief. They shared stories about their father, acknowledging both his strengths and the ways they'd failed to honor his legacy. Teresa attended, dressed in her finest clothes, not understanding where she was, but sensing the solemnity. She held a photo of Miguel, occasionally touching his face and smiling. After the funeral, life settled into new patterns. Layla moved into the mansion's guest house, assuming full-time responsibility for Teresa's care. She hired a team of compassionate aides, therapists, and companions, creating a circle of support that kept Teresa comfortable and engaged. The children visited regularly, and slowly, painfully, they learned. Daniel discovered that his mother loved classical music and would sit for hours listening to symphonies, her face peaceful. Patricia learned that Teresa enjoyed gardening, or at least sitting in the garden, her hands in the soil, her face in the sun. Carlos found that reading to her, not books she had to follow, but poetry with rhythm and beauty, made her smile. They were small victories, but victories nonetheless. The recordings Layla had made became part of family counseling sessions. Dr. Williams would play them, both the terrible ones showing the children's cruelty and the beautiful ones showing Miguel and Teresa's enduring love. "This is who you were," she'd say, playing the cruel recordings. "And this is who you could be," she'd add, playing the tender ones. Slowly, over months and then years, the children transformed. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. Change never is. But they began to cherish time with Teresa rather than endure it. They started to see her not as the mother they'd lost, but as the person she still was. Daniel brought his own children more often, teaching them to be patient with their grandmother, modeling the gentleness he was still learning himself. Patricia commissioned a professional videographer to document Teresa's daily life, creating an archive of her final years that honored her dignity and personality. Carlos composed music inspired by his parents' love story, performing it at Alzheimer's awareness events and donating the proceeds to research. They weren't doing it for inheritance. That was gone, and they'd accepted it. They were doing it because they'd learned, finally, what their father had tried to teach them, that some things matter more than money. Teresa lived for 3 more years after Miguel's death. Her Alzheimer's progressed, stealing more memories, more abilities, more of who she'd been. But she was never alone, never neglected, never treated as less than human. Layla cared for her with unwavering compassion, finding joy in small moments. Teresa's laughter at birds in the garden, her pleasure in ice cream on hot days, her occasional flashes of clarity when she'd look at a family photo and say a name. When Teresa died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family, it felt like a completion rather than a tragedy. She'd been loved well in her final years, cared for with dignity, honored as the person she'd always been. The children grieved genuinely this time, not the performative grief of the funeral, but deep sorrow for the mother they'd learned to know again only to lose. "I wasted so much time," Daniel said at the memorial service. "Years when I could have known her, really known her. But I was too busy seeing what I was losing instead of cherishing what remained." Layla taught me that. My father's will forced me to confront it, and my mother, in her grace, gave me the chance to learn it. He looked at Layla, sitting in the front row. "You recorded our worst moments and showed them to us. We hated you for it at first. But you saved us from becoming people we'd never be able to live with. You gave us the chance to be better." After Teresa's death, the trust was dissolved as planned. The remaining assets, nearly $40 million after years of exceptional care, were transferred to the Miguel and Teresa Reyes Foundation for Alzheimer's research and caregiver support. Layla was offered the position of executive director. She accepted, using everything she'd learned caring for Teresa to advocate for others facing similar journeys. The foundation funded research into Alzheimer's treatments, but more importantly, it supported caregivers, the professionals who did this work for love and low wages, and the family ones who struggled to care for loved ones while managing their own lives. They created training programs teaching what Layla had shown the Reyes children: that caring for someone with dementia wasn't about preserving who they were, but honoring who they are. They established support groups, respite care programs, and financial assistance for families who couldn't afford quality care. And they used Layla's recordings, with the family's permission, in training videos and advocacy campaigns. The cruel recordings showed what happened when families saw elderly parents as burdens. The tender ones showed what was possible when dignity and love prevailed. "These recordings saved my parents," Daniel said in one training video. "Not the beautiful ones. We knew they loved each other. But the ugly ones, the ones that showed us as we really were. Seeing ourselves through that mirror forced us to change. It's painful, but necessary." If you're treating an elderly parent as an obstacle rather than a person, you need someone to hold up that mirror before it's too late. The foundation grew, expanding to multiple states, helping thousands of families navigate Alzheimer's with more grace and compassion. Layla became a national voice for caregiver rights and elder dignity, speaking at conferences and advising on policy. But she never forgot where it started, with two elderly people being mistreated by their children and her decision to document that mistreatment despite the risk to her career. 5 years after Teresa's death, Layla received an unexpected visitor at the foundation's headquarters. It was Daniel, now 52 and gray at the temples, looking more like his father than he ever had before. "I wanted to show you something," he said, pulling out his phone. He played a video. It showed him with his own father, not Miguel, but himself as a father, helping his elderly father-in-law navigate his new diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. Daniel was patient, gentle, treating the older man with the kind of respect he'd failed to show his own father until too late. "I learned from my mistakes," Daniel said. "I'm teaching my children what my father tried to teach me, that getting old isn't a failure, that needing help isn't weakness, that the measure of family isn't what you inherit, but how you treat each other." "Your father would be proud," Layla said. "I hope so," Daniel replied. "I think about the recordings you made, both kinds. The ones that showed us at our worst and the ones that showed them at their best. You know what I realize now?" "What?" "The worst recordings weren't the ones where we were cruel. Those were just symptoms. The worst recording was the silence before you started documenting. All those months when we were treating them badly and nobody said anything. Nobody held us accountable. You ended the silence. That was the real gift." He was right. The recordings had been evidence, but the real intervention was the decision to stop being a silent witness to mistreatment. "I did it because I couldn't watch anymore," Layla admitted. "I wasn't trying to be heroic. I was just trying to protect two people who couldn't protect themselves." "That's what heroism is," Daniel said. "Doing the right thing even when it's hard, even when it costs you something, even when nobody's watching." "People were watching," Layla corrected with a slight smile. "I was recording them." They both laughed, and in that laughter was reconciliation and growth and the strange grace that sometimes emerges from tragedy. The foundation continued to thrive. The recordings, properly anonymized for public use but kept in their original form in the foundation's archives, became powerful teaching tools. They showed the reality of elder care at its worst and its best, helping families recognize their own patterns and choose better. Medical students studied them in ethics classes. Caregiver training programs used them to demonstrate both what to do and what to avoid. Policymakers cited them when arguing for stronger protections for vulnerable elderly people. And occasionally, late at night in her office, Layla would play the recording of Teresa's moment of clarity at Miguel's deathbed. "Rest now. I'll keep watch." It reminded her why this work mattered. Because love persisted beyond memory, because dignity mattered until the very end, because every elderly person deserved to be seen as fully human, even when illness stole pieces of who they'd been. The Reyes children each found their own ways to honor their parents' memory. Daniel joined the foundation's board, using his business acumen to expand their reach. Patricia became a volunteer coordinator, managing the army of companions and aides who provided respite care. Carlos continued composing, creating a full symphony inspired by love and loss and redemption. They'd never get back the years they'd wasted, never undo the pain they'd caused their father in his final months, but they could ensure other families didn't make the same mistakes. Your father's greatest gift to you, Dr. Williams told them during their final counseling session, wasn't his money or his business or his will. It was his decision to confront you with the truth of your own behavior. He loved you enough to force you to be better. And Lila's recordings made that possible, Patricia added. The recordings were just evidence, Dr. Williams said. Your father's courage in confronting you, your willingness to face that truth and change, that's what made the difference. 10 years after Miguel's death, the foundation unveiled a memorial garden at their headquarters. At its center was a bronze statue of an elderly couple, hands clasped, gazing at each other with the kind of love that transcends time and memory. The plaque read, "Miguel and Teresa Reyes, whose love endured beyond memory, whose dignity persisted beyond illness, and whose legacy teaches us that how we treat the vulnerable defines who we are." At the dedication ceremony, Lila spoke to a crowd of families, caregivers, researchers, and advocates. "I was 28 when I met the Reyes family," she said. "I was a hospice nurse who thought I understood death and dying. But Miguel and Teresa taught me that dying isn't just about the body failing. It's about how we honor the person as they leave us." She paused, looking at the statue. "I made recordings because I saw injustice and I couldn't stay silent. I didn't know if it would matter, if anyone would care, if it would change anything. But I've learned that bearing witness, documenting truth, even when it's ugly, is sometimes the most important thing we can do." The recordings I made showed a family at their worst and at their best. They showed children who'd forgotten how to honor their parents, and they showed a love that persisted beyond language and memory. Both truths were necessary. Both truths changed lives. She looked out at the audience, seeing families who'd come through their own journeys with Alzheimer's, seeing the Reyes children in the front row, seeing caregivers who did this sacred work every day. If you take nothing else from this story, take this. Don't wait until someone's dying to see them clearly. Don't wait until they can't speak to hear what they're saying. And if you see someone being diminished, dehumanized, or mistreated, speak up. Record it if you have to. Bear witness. Break the silence. Because silence is complicity, and these vulnerable lives deserve voices, their own and ours when theirs are stolen by illness. The applause was long and heartfelt. The statue stood in the garden, a permanent reminder that love and dignity matter more than money, that family is defined by how we treat each other in the hardest moments, that it's never too late to become better than we've been. And in the Foundation's archives, carefully preserved, were the recordings that had started it all, a nurse's secret documentation of cruelty and tenderness, betrayal and love, the worst of human nature and the possibility of redemption. Those recordings had left everyone in tears, just as the title had promised. But they were complex tears, of shame and recognition, of grief and hope, of endings and new beginnings. Miguel had died knowing his wife would be cared for with dignity. Teresa had lived her final years surrounded by love. The children had learned to honor their parents before it was too late. And Layla had transformed her decision to bear witness into a foundation that protected thousands. It wasn't a simple story of heroes and villains. It was a story of flawed people, confronted with truth, choosing to change, learning to love better. And at the heart of it all was one young nurse who'd pressed record and refused to stay silent, who'd risked her career to protect two elderly people who couldn't protect themselves. That was the real miracle, not the recordings themselves, but the courage it took to make them and the changes they inspired. In the garden, the bronze couple sat eternally hand in hand, reminding everyone who passed that love was the only inheritance that truly mattered, the only legacy worth leaving, the only thing that persisted when memory failed and bodies faltered. And somewhere in the cloud, in the Foundation's secure servers, the recordings remained, a testament to one nurse's courage and the transformation it sparked, ready to teach new generations the same lessons. See the vulnerable. Speak for the voiceless. Document the truth. Demand dignity. Love fiercely until the very end. These were the lessons Miguel and Teresa had lived. These were the lessons Layla had learned. And these were the lessons the Foundation would teach forever, ensuring that two people's suffering and love and ultimate redemption continued saving lives long after they were gone. The recordings that had left everyone in tears became the recordings that changed everything. For a family, for a foundation, for countless vulnerable elderly people who deserved better than they'd been getting. And it all started with a young nurse, a phone in her pocket, and the courage to press record when silence would have been easier. That courage echoed through the years, through the Foundation's work, through the families they helped, through the lives they changed. Some acts of bravery are loud and dramatic. Others are quiet. Just a finger pressing a button. Just a voice saying this isn't right. Just a decision to bear witness instead of looking away. Layla's bravery was the quiet kind, but its impact was thunderous, and it would echo for generations to come. She paused, looking at the statue. I made recordings because I saw injustice, and I couldn't stay silent. I didn't know if it would matter, if anyone would care, if it would change anything. But I've learned that bearing witness, documenting truth, even when it's ugly, is sometimes the most important thing we can do. The recordings I made showed a family at their worst and at their best. They showed children who'd forgotten how to honor their parents, and they showed a love that persisted beyond language and memory. Both truths were necessary. Both truths changed lives. She looked out at the audience, seeing families who'd come through their own journeys with Alzheimer's, seeing the Reyes children in the front row, seeing caregivers who did this sacred work every day. If you take nothing else from this story, take this. Don't wait until someone's dying to see them clearly. Don't wait until they can't speak to hear what they're saying. And if you see someone being diminished, dehumanized, or mistreated, speak up. Record it if you have to. Bear witness. Break the silence. Because silence is complicity. And these vulnerable lives deserve voices, their own and ours when theirs are stolen by illness. The applause was long and heartfelt. The statue stood in the garden, a permanent reminder that love and dignity matter more than money, that family is defined by how we treat each other in the hardest moments, that it's never too late to become better than we've been. And in the Foundation's archives, carefully preserved, were the recordings that had started it all. A nurse's secret documentation of cruelty and tenderness, betrayal and love, the worst of human nature and the possibility of redemption. Those recordings had left everyone in tears, just as the title had promised. But they were complex tears, of shame and recognition, of grief and hope, of endings and new beginnings. Miguel had died knowing his wife would be cared for with dignity. Teresa had lived her final years surrounded by love. The children had learned to honor their parents before it was too late, and Layla had transformed her decision to bear witness into a foundation that protected thousands. It wasn't a simple story of heroes and villains. It was a story of flawed people confronted with truth, choosing to change, learning to love better. And at the heart of it all was one young nurse who'd pressed record and refused to stay silent, who'd risked her career to protect two elderly people who couldn't protect themselves. That was the real miracle, not the recordings themselves, but the courage it took to make them and the changes they inspired. In the garden, the bronze couple sat eternally hand in hand, reminding everyone who passed that love was the only inheritance that truly mattered, the only legacy worth leaving, the only thing that persisted when memory failed and bodies faltered. And somewhere in the cloud, in the Foundation's secure servers, the recordings remained, a testament to one nurse's courage and the transformation it sparked, ready to teach new generations the same lessons. See the vulnerable, speak for the voiceless, document the truth, demand dignity, love fiercely until the very end. These were the lessons Miguel and Teresa had lived. These were the lessons Layla had learned. And these were the lessons the Foundation would teach forever, ensuring that two people's suffering and love and ultimate redemption continued saving lives long after they were gone. The recordings that had left everyone in tears became the recordings that changed everything. For a family, for a foundation, for countless vulnerable elderly people who deserved better than they'd been getting. And it all started with a young nurse, a phone in her pocket, and the courage to press record when silence would have been easier. That courage echoed through the years, through the Foundation's work, through the families they helped, through the lives they changed. Some acts of bravery are loud and dramatic. Others are quiet, just a finger pressing a button, just a voice saying this isn't right, just a decision to bear witness instead of looking away. Layla's bravery was the quiet kind, but its impact was thunderous, and it would echo for generations to come.